a call. Keep a secret, put it through. Investigate to knows it all. He's at the window, I wonder who. Got to cut the line and let me drift. While the hair in the stall. I got no time, I need a lift. Where it's reaching close and raw. Ooh, L.A Connection. Oh,
I was one of the original rebels that got thrown out of high school for not wearing uniform or getting my hair cut. I refused it. I said, nope, I was good at my work. I was in A classes, and they knew I was good at my work, but they insisted that I get a proper haircut and wear the school uniform, and I just wouldn't. So I was probably, I don't know, 16. I went for an audition with a band that was in Sydney called Dennis Williams and the Delawares, and they had a record out and they'd been on telly, and I thought, oh well, you know, I'm just a kid, but I'll give it a shot. You never know. And I got the gig. You know, it was like, ow, I'm in the Delawares, and that to me at that time, I felt like I was in the Beatles.
So how do you then get from 1970 to living in England?
Carver Street went into 1971, and then we kind of had the notion of, this band's a pretty good band, let's take it to England. I got a lot of encouragement from my family, my mum, dad, my sister and my friends. You go over there and do something. So I did. I got on the plane and I went over there, and I landed in London, and I hooked up with Clive Coulson, who'd been a singer with the band Mecca for a while, and he was the sound guy for Led Zeppelin, and I went and stayed at his flat, and obviously working for Zeppelin, he was very well connected. He came in there one day, Clive did, with this little bit of paper with this name Stan Webb written on it, and this phone number. He said, Stan Webb, he's got a blues band called Chicken Shack. He said, give him a call, he's looking for a bass player. So I phoned Stan, and then I went for an audition, and I didn't hear anything for a while. And then on my 22nd birthday, I was in a pub in Holland Park, and who should I see in there but Stan Webb. And he looked across, he was just quite a tall bloke, he was about 6'1", and he looked across the top of the people's heads and he said, all right. He said, do you still want that gig? And I said, yeah. He said, right, you're in. And I got the gig with Chicken Shack on my 22nd birthday. And even Clive said, he said, look, it's not like joining a real big band. He said, but it's a name band, and they'd had, you know, chart success, and they were quite well known, Chicken Shack.
After that was Widowmaker, was it?
No, after that was under the same management was Mungo Jerry, and this is about 1973 now. The management of Chicken Shack and Mungo Jerry asked me to leave Chicken Shack and go into Mungo Jerry, because Mungo Jerry was a sort of more of a pop rock band, you know. So I joined Mungo Jerry, and we had quite a big hit with a song called All Right, All Right, All Right. They never ever did great big like concert halls or whatever, but they did had very healthy attendance and just played discos and clubs and that sort of thing, you know. But it was playing all the time, which does you're playing great, you know. And after that was when we formed Widowmaker in '75. Luther was forming this band, and he asked me to do it. And he had the drummer Paul Nichols from Lindisfarne, Hugh Lloyd Langton, who'd come from Hawkwind, and Steve Ellis, who'd been in a band called The Love Affair. And I think it was Steve that came up with the name Widowmaker. I was in Los Angeles, and I wasn't particularly happy with the way things were going with Widowmaker, because there were squabbles and bitching and boozing and drug taking, but you know, being sort of destructive, and it wasn't going great, and it didn't feel great. So I met up with a friend of mine, an English guy who I'd been in Mungo Jerry with, Dick Middleton, guitar player. And he said, oh, I'm a mate of Ritchie Blackmore's. Well, I knew he was a mate of Ritchie Blackmore's, but he said, Ritchie's here in LA, lives here. He's looking for a bass player for his band Rainbow, because he'd had Jimmy Bain before that, but I think Jimmy and Ritchie had a fallout or something. He said, would you be interested? And I said, well, yeah, as it happens, I would be interested, because I'm ready to do something else. So Dick and Ritchie and I went out for just a couple of beers and something to eat as a social meeting. Because with Ritchie, I don't think he'd even audition unless he thought that there'd be a chance that you could get on with him, you know. So I went for the audition after we'd had a couple of nights on the beer together. I went down for an audition, and Ronnie and Cozy were there. Ritchie put me through my paces, you know, try this, try that. And the one thing he did like was I played with a pick, which he liked the sound of bass played with a pick, and for the precision of it, you know. At the end of that audition, you know, they just said, well, you've got the gig if you want it. And I said, I'll think about it. Well, I wasn't sure, because I had this sort of, you know, the Widowmaker thing was still going, and I had a certain
Loyalty to them?
well, yeah, a certain loyalty and obligation to at least maybe try to see it through, and you know. But then we did a gig at the Whiskey, I think the next night or something, and Ritchie came along and he saw the gig, and after the gig at the Whiskey there was more squabbles and bitching and fights and stuff with Widowmaker, and I thought, I don't have to think about it anymore. The decision's been made for me. I thought, that's it. So I walked down the stairs, out of the Whiskey, up the road into the Rainbow, where I told Ritchie I'd meet him. And I walked in, and I felt very, very flattered, because as I walked in, he stood up and applauded. And I thought, wow, you know, that's... Ritchie didn't do that, you know, very often.
With Purple having been the biggest band in the world,
yeah,
and then get the gig with Ritchie, that would have been a bit of a thrill for your family as well, I would imagine.
Oh, certainly. Yeah, my wife Vicky was as soon as I mentioned that I'd been offered the Rainbow thing, she said, "You have to do it." And I said, "Well, I'm thinking about it." "No, you have to do it." You know.
Because I gather, with prior to that album release of Long Live Rock and Roll, he'd actually tried out like literally dozens of bass players before he decided.
Oh, in L.A. I think they'd tried out about 40 bass players or something. I see a lot of bass players in those days were playing fingerstyle, and Ritchie didn't want a fingerstyle bass player. He wanted somebody to play with a pick for the precision and the speed of the right hand, which was right up my street. So,
did you play on every song on that album? Because actually, Ritchie
no, I didn't play on every song on that album. Ritchie had already done some of the bass on some of it before I even joined. So we went to, after we rehearsed in Los Angeles for probably a month or something, and I learnt the full set, and we did the full production rehearsal and what have you. We did a European tour of all of Europe, Scandinavia. I think we started in Scandinavia. I think maybe the first show was meant to be in Helsinki, and something happened with the gear or the trucks or something, and we didn't do it. And I think the first show we ever did was in Stockholm. And then we did the Scandinavian tour, and then around Europe and England. Oh, it was great. It was really, really good. It was an enjoyment, and it was, like I said, it was very disciplined, and I loved the discipline of it, because don't forget, I'd just come from Widowmaker, which wasn't that disciplined, and you know, musically it was good, and it was a good feel in Widowmaker musically, but you know, the discipline of Ritchie and Ronnie too was what I really enjoyed.
I get that they were a partnership, weren't they?
They were.
It was their band as such.
Yeah, it was.
Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow.
It was called, originally it was called Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. And then I think after a while, Ronnie and Cozy wanted the Ritchie Blackmore dropped and just call it Rainbow, which
and I think Ritchie did too. I don't think Ritchie wanted Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow either. Maybe
not. Maybe it was the record company or management or both that you know, they like to do that. They like to sell something by using somebody's name.
So you've been on the road, then went back into the studio to record the album.
Yes, yeah. The album was done right at the end of '77 and then into '78. The very beginning of '78, and then I think in January we went to Japan, and then the album came out while we were in Japan, and we promoted it in Japan. Rainbow were huge in Japan. It was unbelievable. I think we did about 3 nights at the Budokan. And they may have even put in another night at the end of the tour as well. So they're very big gigs in Japan, and very well received. And some of the places we went, you couldn't go out of the hotel because the streets around the hotel were just filled with young people that were Rainbow fans. Probably a lot of ex-Purple fans and all that, but because Purple were like the Beatles in Japan, weren't they? At 77, was like in New Musical Express, which is a music paper, or Melody Maker, which is another one. In the polls, we got Best Live Act of the Year.
I think you've been Best Guitar Player for like the previous 6 as well.
Yeah.
The thing with Rainbow was that huge rainbow that they used to truck around.
Yeah, it was a fascinating thing, but it was a nightmare sometimes, getting it into halls and getting it out. And also, we used to get a lot of interference through Ritchie's amp, because from the Rainbow. So I think sometimes we just couldn't use it for various reasons. There's a funny story about there's a promoter called Eric Thompson in Scandinavia. He's Danish, and every band, every act used to always play tricks on him, practical jokes and what have you, you know. And we were in Paris on one of his tours. We'd done the Scandinavian thing, and when we were in Paris, probably Ritchie put him up to it, I would imagine, but the road crew held Eric Thompson down and stripped him and made this harness and strung him up over the rainbow, bollock naked. And the next day on the front page of the paper is Eric Thompson hanging from the rainbow, bollock naked. But the funny thing was, and this is the punchline of the story, he started going really red in the face, hanging up there, and the road crew thought, uh-oh, we've made the harness too tight, or he's can't get his breath or whatever, we better let him down. And they let him down, and they said, are you all right, you all right? And he said, yeah, what's right? He said, you were going red in the face. He said, that's all right, I was just trying to shit on Cozy. But Ritchie, Eric Thompson, obviously his initials are E.T., and he actually looked a little bit like E.T., he had a sort of an E.T. sort of face. Yeah. And Ritchie got his passport and took his photo out and put a picture of E.T. in and didn't tell him. And we were going through customs somewhere, and he handed his passport, and he opens it up, and there's a picture of E.T. in there. So they're all calling their mates over.
We're in Austria, and there was obviously an incident.
Yeah, one of the gigs, it must have been Vienna, I think. There was a problem with the hall manager, and he had an attitude, and I think when we went on stage, the audience got a bit rowdy or something, and this hall manager was being a bit of a dick, and I think he put the house lights on, which really pissed Ritchie off, and then he stood in front of Ritchie during the first part of the show like this, and that was the wrong way to rub Ritchie, you know. So Ritchie lashed out with his foot, and this bloke tried to grab him, and then Ritchie, second time, caught him right on the jaw, poof, and down he went, like a sack of sponge, and he went down. I think he'd either fractured or broken his jaw. And then at the end, we did the whole show, and at the end of the show, the police were called in, and they had sniffer dogs, and Ritchie was hiding in one of the drum cases, and the crew were going to try to smuggle him out. But the sniffer dogs and the police found him, and they handcuffed him and jailed him, and he was in jail for a couple of days. It could have been even 3 or 4 days. I can't remember. But the show that was to be filmed was soon after that, which was in Munich, and I know we were supposed to go on around 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night, and Ritchie hadn't made it back from. He only just got out of jail in Vienna. And he just made it to the gig, and I think we ended up going on at about 11:30 at night or something, very, very late. But the audience were very patient, and the show was good, as you will see. But it was a real experience for Ritchie to be in this jail for a few days, and then we didn't know, when he was going to get out, or if the tour was going to end, or what was going to happen, So I guess you'd have to talk to him to ask him what it was like in jail and what went on during that time.
It's interesting watching the gig though, how, I mean, the band were incredible.
Well, I'd only been in the band about playing live. I think the tour started in about September, so we'd only been gigging for about a month or something. I'd only been in the band about a month. But, we did a lot of rehearsals, and we put in the groundwork for it to be, polished.
What was your first experience with Cozy then? Do you remember just from the rehearsals, or did you meet him outside of that?
I hadn't actually. I don't think I had, but Clive Coulson, the guy I mentioned earlier about the working for Zeppelin and that, he'd been working with Jeff Beck as well, with the Jeff Beck group that Cozy was in, with Clive Chayman and Bobby Tench and Max Middleton and that. And Clive used to, I think he used to breed Alsatians, white Alsatians, and Cozy came round and bought one of the pups once, and I saw him there at Clive's place, and that was his dog was called Heidi. I remember that. Heidi, and that was one of the things that we struck up a conversation about when I first went for the audition with Rainbow. So it was not. It broke the ice. It was like just friendly chatting straight away. Oh, he was a great drummer, brilliant drummer. Very, very good.
Was he pretty wild, or was that just sort of the reputation he tried to with the cars?
You mean lifestyle?
Yeah, lifestyle-wise.
Oh, he drove fast. Wow.
He raced Le Mans, didn't he? I think.
He used to race cars. Yep. And part of the European tour, he had a Ferrari Dino, and he took that on tour. And so, because in those days we didn't have tour buses, you'd travel either by plane, or if it was a short enough drive, you know, maybe a couple of 100k or something, you'd do it in Mercedes limos or whatever. But Cozy brought his car over, and I travelled in it with him, and we used to zap along the Autobahn at about 145 miles an hour, which is what, 240, 250k or something. And it was so low, it was, you know, you'd be flying past these great big juggernaut trucks. And I remember one day he slowed down to about 100 miles an hour, which after doing that really high speeds, it seemed quite slow. And he's driving at 100, and then we're getting closer to the town, and he's dropping back to 90 and that. And when we got there, I said, that seemed fairly slow for you, Cozy. He said, yeah, the brakes were playing up. So he drove the car back to England, or he put it on a boat or something, and then we just travelled in the normal rental cars and that after that.
How do you move out of Rainbow? Did you get the elbow, or you left, or what happened?
It kind of it ground to a halt, and it was funny it was sort of ironic how it all turned out, because during the last part of the American tour, Ronnie started to get, I suppose, inklings that all was not well in the Rainbow and the Ritchie camp with him and the rest, you know. So Ronnie started asking me. He said, "Look, if this doesn't last, or if it, you know, disbands at the end of this tour," he said, "would you be interested in getting a band together with me?" And I said, "Yeah, of course." I said, "If this folds, then yeah, I'd like to keep going with you know, if you're going to do something." So at the end of that tour, it was decided that you know, Ritchie was going to get a new lineup. I think he kept Cozy for a while, and then Cozy went as well. But he kept Cozy for a while. But Ronnie phoned me. I was living in London, and Ronnie phoned me and he said, "Well, it is over," and he said, "I'd like to get a band together. Are you interested?" And I said, "Yep." And he said, "Well, hang in there." He said, "I'm looking for guitar players at the moment, and we're going to sort out a record deal, and we'll get some dough together and a budget, and we'll fly you over, and we'll do all that." So I was sitting there waiting. And then I'd get another phone call from Ronnie saying, "How's everything? We're still taking care of business." And so I was, he just said, "Well, you know, don't do anything else. This is going to happen." And so one day I went out and I bought Melody Maker, I think it was, and it's got on the front page, "Ronnie James Dio joins Black Sabbath." Oh, thanks for telling me, you know. But he did never actually really tell me, you know. So Ozzy was out of Sabbath. And then I got a phone call from Sharon saying, "Do you know any great guitar players or other musicians for Ozzy?" But she didn't ask me, she was just asking me in general. And I said, "Well, I'll think, and I'll have a look around and I'll let you know." So that was the end of Rainbow for us.
Ritchie or no one from management said, "Look, Bob, see you later"? You just sort of walk away from a gig and that's it?
Just sort of, yeah. After I think the very last show we did was in New York at the end of the tour. And I think it was, you know, let's wait and see what's going to happen next. But nothing did. Well, you know, not for that lineup anyway. So, you know, Ritchie had, I guess, made the decision then that he wanted the new lineup. So he got, you know, Roger and Graham Bonnet was the first singer he had, wasn't it? Yeah.
Did anyone ever talk to you about reunions for that band?
Oh yeah, I'd actually talked to Cozy not long before he died, in about, what year was it? About probably around 97 or 98, somewhere around there. There was a guy I'd hooked up with in Los Angeles that was very interested in maybe trying to, get a reunion happening and some shows and an album and what have you. And I spoke to Cozy about it a couple of times on the phone. So I didn't actually talk to Ronnie then, but it was there were moves being made to try and put it together to do that. Whether Ritchie would have done it, I don't know. I think maybe Cozy had talked to Ritchie or something, because it was getting to the stage where it felt almost like, yes, it's going to happen. But then soon after that, Cozy went, in his car crash. Ritchie and I got on very well together. I've often been asked, what was it like working with Blackmore? He's a weird bloke, or is he a moody bloke and all that? I said, well, I usually said, I got on fine with him, because I never ever rocked the boat. I just put my head down, got on with it, did a professional job as well as I could, and looked at it and used it as a stepping stone and a good opportunity to work with a big name band that was very professional and very disciplined, which I loved, and I learned a lot from it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Working for Deep Purple. I first started in 1971, late 1971, after touring the US with the band. It was Rod Stewart and the Faces, Deep Purple and Matthew's Southern Comfort, and I was with Matthew's Southern Comfort. And after the tour I was asked to join Deep Purple, and I jumped at the chance. So that was it, basically. I was along since then. It was certainly the best time for touring, in my opinion, from a performer's and personnel point of view. It was great for the crew. Certainly the best times to actually tour. Now it seems like it's all business and politics. And, it's all about money now. The whole atmosphere has changed. Not really, because that was like the best time to tour for most bands. It was a really exciting time. Every band in the world seemed to be out on the road, and it just seemed right. It was wonderful. It was a great time to tour. I was asked by Blackmore to come along, and it seemed like the end of Deep Purple to me. It was a sad time. So I decided to make the jump and move with him. And Purple carried on with Tommy Bolin and David Coverdale and Glenn Hughes, and I made the move. So it was nothing I regretted, that's for sure. Right from the very start, yeah. We all moved to California with Ritchie, and that's where we set up shop and started looking for musician. He originally took all of a band called Elf to California with him, and then slowly started to replace them one at a time. And Ronnie Dio was the singer in the band at the time. So we ended up keeping Ronnie and replacing everyone else one at a time over a slow and long and tedious sort of process. And finding new musicians was the worst part of that time. I had the unenviable job of removing the musicians one at a time that he didn't like. So some of them never got to even perform. They just were replaced before. He'd be playing pool and he'd see someone pull in and say, "Oh, get rid of him, would you?" "Well, don't you want to hear him?" "No, just get rid of him." And that was pretty much how we went along on a daily basis for months till he found the right combination. Mr. Blackmore being arrested, yes. Looking back, it was, what he did was fair. I mean, there was a guy in front of the stage who was beating up a 12-year-old girl, or what looked like a 12-year-old girl, who was trying to get closer to the band, and he was just punching her. So Ritchie, seeing this, it was the first time he'd reacted like this ever, as far as I'd seen. He went up and he kicked the guy in the side of the head to just get his attention, you know. And it just happened to be the hall manager who was friends with every policeman in the whole of Austria, so it seemed. So by the time the show was over, the entire backstage area was swarming with police. And we made a valiant attempt to smuggle him out of the building. The road crew came up with this great idea. They'd shove him in a flight case, close it up and roll it into a truck, and then try and get him out, you know, as quickly as possible. And of course the police dogs put an end to that. They sort of sniffed him out, which wasn't hard at that time, having just done a 90-minute show. And he was tumbled. And one of our road crew, a guy called Ox, took quite a beating to actually prevent Ritchie from taking a beating. So it was quite an ugly scene, but Ritchie was hauled off to jail, so was this guy Ox, and we got Ox out that night, but they held on to Ritchie as being the more valuable of the two. And he was there for 3 days before we got him out. We carried on, went on to Germany, and we had lawyers working from both sides of the Atlantic to get him out. And eventually we got him out, and we got him to Munich within minutes of being too late to do a performance. Somebody drove him from Austria to there in the same clothes he was wearing the night of the Austrian show. Drove him straight into the arena that we were playing in, the Munich Olympia Halle actually. And he took about 10 minutes to compose himself and went right back on stage with exactly the same stage clothes on. And I think the entire thing was videoed, so I mean, it's you can see there was some sort of strain and relief in his eyes, and in his playing that night. We went on stage about 12 o'clock at night. The crowd waited, and they knew what was going on. They knew why I was late, and it turned out to be a great show, actually. Definitely RB. He controlled the whole ship at the time. It was exactly what he wanted, how he wanted it, and you know, he knew what he wanted. He knew exactly what he wanted to hear from the musicians, and that's why he was so fussy and trying to get, you know, the exact lineup he wanted. He knew exactly what he wanted to hear, and he wouldn't stop until he heard that, you know, and he got it. A wonderful guy and a great loss to the music industry. I had the pleasure to share a house with him for a couple of years in Connecticut, and really, really nice guy. All the nice ones go first, so it seems. Ronnie was excellent, or is an excellent guy. Nice, great man to know. We had an excellent time on the road with this orchestral tour. He was just a charm to work with. He actually did every interview I asked him to do without question. So it was great to work with him again. And he's a lovely guy, real lovely guy. Actually, Bob Daisley just called me from Australia out of the blue for the first time. It's the first time I've spoken to him in about 12 years. And we had a very, very long chat for an hour and a half about life, love, hate, relationships, the old days. Really, really good chat. It was great to talk to him again. He's doing well. He's married with 2 kids, still married to the same lady for all these 20-odd years now. So he's doing well, but he moved back to Australia and he loves it there. So. It went as far as Ritchie wanted it to go. He could have made it bigger, but he chose to not go to some places in the world that could have, led to bigger success. And it got as big as he wanted it to be. He controlled it in that way, and he was perfectly happy with where he was at the time. So. It was the best times of my life, I think. Living in California in the early 70s, it was just a magical time. It was a lovely place to live then. I wouldn't say it is now, but we just had some great times, some fun times. Unlike the business today, it was a lot of fun. But I'd like to go back and visit maybe one day some of the old haunts. The Rainbow Bar and Grill, where I spent most of my life and money.